Good luck. Hi, Robin. How are you?
How you doing?
I'm great. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, excellent. Is this on? This should work. Yeah. Well, thank you. We want to do a bit of a deep dive into something we've touched on over the course of this afternoon around the gig economy. And we've seen that in the research we've done. It has rapidly, and certainly over the last 5 years, become a real staple for how organizations get work done. Now, you guys have just done some really cool research. I think the audience would love to hear about some of that.
Absolutely, yeah. So we publish an annual study that really tracks the size, the growth of the freelance economy. We call it Freelancing in America. And it's provided a really cool longitudinal view because we've been doing it for 5 years. And we're really seeing just the continued growth and acceleration of freelancing. This year, we measured that 56.7 million people in the U.S. are freelancing or doing some kind of contingent, part-time, flexible kind of work, which means that it's over a third of the U.S. workforce. And we're seeing that contingent of the workforce is really growing at 3 times the rate compared to the non-freelance workforce. So really just fascinating to see this part of the market really take off. And also just seeing really fascinating trends about how technology is really factoring into the opportunities that people can find freelancing.
That's great. So what's driving the growth in the economy, and how does that then relate to how companies can sort of use platforms like Upwork and the like?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, as you've heard from many presenters today, technology is really changing how we interact in the workplace and with our colleagues. Now you can be live editing a document with somebody halfway across the world. You can have a crystal clear video chat and be sharing your screen practically for free, if not for free. And this has really transformed the ways that we collaborate. We see more and more remote relationships. The office is becoming optional. The commute is becoming optional, which is great for workers. But it's also great for companies because companies now can look a little bit beyond that 1 hour radius of their office, and it opens up possibilities for them to access talent. So that's one major trend. The other is one that I know you've looked at a lot, which is the specialization of skills and the emergence of super hot skills that are in high demand. With all the innovation that entrepreneurs, like many of the folks in this room, are doing, there's always kind of this better, faster, more cost-effective way to run your business, whether it's building your technology stack or doing a new form of marketing. Or incorporating data science into your product. And this is creating just increased demand and need for these really valuable skills. And it's creating also a lot of pressure for employers that want to access it in order for themselves to stay competitive. And sometimes that rate of innovation and the draw for these skills outpaces the pool of people that can supply it, particularly in any given geographic area. So combined with the ease of remote working, it's really resulting in companies reevaluating how to staff their teams and how to think about hiring in general.
Yeah, you know what's fascinating, when we wrote our last book, Lead the Work, we had Diane Gearson, who's the Chief HR Officer at IBM, actually write the foreword. And it was fascinating because what she wrote about was kind of just this personal experience of IBM having chased this 5-star developer. And for everything she could talk about as it relates to why you would work with a world-class organization like IBM, this person was able to refute and sort of point to the benefits that he had working on that particular platform. So it is really fascinating. One of the things that jumped out at me, David, was when I looked at your study, there has traditionally been this equation, it's really outdated now, that people go into the gig economy, broadly defined, out of necessity. And the study really started to point to a pretty dramatic shift in why people go on to a platform like Upwork or more broadly the gig economy.
Absolutely, yeah. the reasons for people joining the freelance workforce are changing. It's no longer the majority of folks doing it by necessity. It's doing it for the desire to have a flexible lifestyle. If you are a talented freelancer in a particular skill area, you could work with dozens of really fantastic companies and gain a lot more perspective yourself. And you can also enjoy the luxury of being anywhere in the world. It's a particularly interesting trend to look at the kind of next generation of workers, so-called millennials and now Gen Z. When you survey this population, the importance of flexibility and change and constant education is really tangible, and employers are having to adapt to this. And one of the ways is by creating programs that support remote work, rotational programs, supporting education, and kind of flex time to do more skilling. But what's incredible is that the freelance workforce, sort of by necessity, ends up reskilling itself because they're on the open market, and so they're constantly listening for what's hot and what will be valued. And so we see that when we survey freelancers versus non-freelancers, 65% of freelancers say that they are constantly seeking new skill training, whereas 30% of full-time employees are actually considering to change their skills. So we just see a different perspective in this kind of income generation as well as in the freelance workforce, and it's working to the benefit of a lot of employers and companies that want to harness all the positive aspects of flexible work and access these new skills.
That's a really interesting point. I touched on the reskilling imperative a second ago, and the cynic in me sort of says, why wouldn't large organizations tap into an Upwork? Because given the shrinking half-life of skills, Upwork is almost like the ultimate put option on sort of having to reskill talent, right? Because you get to sort of, again, just to be completely cynical about it, you get to sort of absolve yourself of that responsibility. I'm curious, do your customers and your clients think about it in that way as well?
They do, and I think we are very much, as a working culture, we're sort of mired in the traditional way of hiring, and we think about work, I think, too much in the sense of roles, and also, I think the old way of working is to say, I'm going to do the same thing for my entire career, and I'll enjoy that security, but then also I'm not going to really change. And I think increasingly employers are starting to say, well, either you have to have a growth mindset, or we're going to find people that want to adapt and change. And so we're seeing that shift, but I think there's this old conservative point of view. I think companies are discovering new ways to integrate flexible talent alongside the rest of their workforce. So there's this notion of hybrid teams. I know you've talked about it in your book. But the idea is that you have full-time employees that are really great, effective managers and leaders, but they're bringing in sort of the best teams, kind of like how a movie crew will bring in the best cinematographer and the best actors and the best writer, and they'll bring together all these independent organizations into this kind of temporary organization, and then they produce the best possible product. Companies are starting to latch onto this. You can look at a few organizations that we've been working with. Have really been impressed by them changing their work model. These are established companies, but they're starting to find new work models. For example, P&G adapted to this new flexible hybrid model where they brought in videographers and mobile developers and graphic designers and a bunch of other areas. It was just difficult to get the best people in the place at the right time. They were able to enjoy really great cost savings, but then actually really fast delivery. And then another really interesting example is Samsung, kind of the behemoth consumer electronics player. has been a really innovative client, and they basically figured out how to parcel out work that used to be considered necessary for roles into more discrete tasks, and they've turned delivery from what was taking 6 weeks for creative projects down to 2 weeks by systematizing the labor and the workers in their graphic design and other creative practices. So we're seeing big companies start to catch on to it, and I think we'll continue to see that trend. It's kind of like there are these big macro trends that we talked about, technology and skills, and just the ease now of trying out this new way of working.
You alluded to this a second ago, but what are some of the skills that, the fastest moving skills, the hottest skills, if you will, on Upwork, where you're seeing a lot of demand from large organizations?
Yeah, so just yesterday, actually, we published our quarterly skills index, which is a way that we sort of rank the top 20 fastest growing skills based on their popularity and the millions of jobs that are posted on our platform. So we can kind of see the ones that are really skyrocketing. And it's incredible. It changes every single quarter, but this past quarter, we just saw a lot of movement in the whole world of integrating with cloud services. So Dropbox API was the #1 fastest growing skill. Google App Engine, Google Cloud, Salesforce API, these were all in the top 20. And so that appears to be a moving vector. Also, it's great to hear the other Fireside chat about VR, and we're also seeing Oculus, and which is VR technology, as well as Vuforia, which is an augmented reality platform. So we're seeing that kind of on the rise. And then, of course, there's data science related tools. So in machine learning, it's just companies can't get enough of it. And so TensorFlow is a skill. So we see these, and it's just remarkable how it changes every quarter as the needs and the tastes and kind of the imperatives that these companies are feeling fluxes as new technologies become available to them.
So what are some of the things that get in the way of large organizations, making the best use of a platform like Upwork? What do you see as being the biggest obstacles?
I think a lot of established enterprise companies, it's challenging to take that first step because it feels like there's already this proven organizational model, and yet they subject themselves to this insane process of hiring. Now it takes, somebody said, 30 to 40 days on average to find a full-time employee. So they keep going through this, and it's expensive, and the cost of turnover is just enormous. I think it's like $160 billion that we spend on making the wrong hires. So we continue to do this, and I think the reason is that we don't think that our colleagues or our organization will be ready for it. And what we've found is that there's often a maverick or just somebody that's really innovative in these larger organizations that just says, screw it, I'm going to try it. And it becomes incredibly effective. So, I think if you're a leader of a mature company, but you think, man, I wish we could get access to these latest skills. I mean, I would just say dip your toes in. Break down a role into discrete tasks and see what's a task that maybe is low risk, low visibility, and see if you can find a flexible worker solution for that. And utilize some of these online platforms and look at reputation and just try to find somebody that seems like a promising fit and see what happens. And then sort of the next step in that, in gaining that momentum, is to really be introspective about how did that work, what questions did I need to ask to find that right person, and sort of systematize that, turn that into a slate of interview questions, and then we see these organizations delegating responsibility to running kind of a program for freelancers, integrating freelancers into the company, and that involves often getting your HR team involved, getting finance involved, so you can figure out how to properly resource this and turn it into a full-scale effort. And it seems kind of intimidating when you think about trying to get to that end result, but by starting super simple and just taking a little baby step, you can really get into the process, and oftentimes people will just feel themselves kind of getting sucked through into really integrating it into their talent model.
That's a great question. Just a personal sort of anecdote. Well, two stories. One is every time we've been in with large organizations, we work with HR functions. One of the first questions we often ask is we think about this, different work options, whether it's AI or the use of platforms. Is are you using Upwork or a similar platform? And 9 times out of 10, the initial response would be no. And then we actually get into interviewing managers in large distributed organizations, and it's fascinating, just given how, you got sort of the 800-pound gorilla in this space, right? Because of your scale and your penetration. How many times we've come across managers who've said, I've had this rec open for 6 months, 9 months, a year, and there's just this critical body of work that I can't get done, and I've actually they've gone out and they've used their credit card and paid for it, and then they've run it through the expense system. So it's fascinating how easily work can leave the organizational boundary. But in our last sort of few minutes, I'd love to open it up for questions from the audience. Yes, sir.
In the UK, there's an issue now with contractors who are in long-term contractors who are saying companies saying I should be an employee. I was a contractor for 10 years and this all these benefits, and they go out to the companies. So how is this different than a contractor versus a freelancer in a larger organization?
Okay, so I'll just repeat the question just for the benefit of everyone else. So the question was, and I don't think this is limited to the UK, we've seen similar issues here. The question of when an individual has worked for an extended period of time with a particular marketplace or for an organization specifically, the potential claim of benefits, that they've had, that they may feel that they are owed because they've had an extended relationship with the organization, and how do you sort of address that risk, just to paraphrase?
Yeah, so absolutely true. This is not an issue that's unique to the UK. It's something that we have very much so in the US. A lot of the labor laws in the US were crafted in the 1930s and essentially to prevent sweatshops from taking advantage of workers and saying, well, you can't be part of a union because you're not officially an employee, but you're going to do everything else that employees have to do. And so there's this whole question of what is classified as an employee versus a contractor. And I don't want to give you official legal advice, but we have kind of a world-class legal staff that really tries to unpack that. There are about, I would say, over 10 different kind of criteria that sort of determines whether or not somebody you're working with, whether they are indeed an employer or not. It has to do with how you're dictating they spend their time and where they need to be at a certain point in time, and how much are you directly managing their work product versus requesting their deliverable. So there's a lot of different components, and different companies of different scales pay more or less attention to that particular issue. There are a lot of startups that where it's not really a very relevant issue, or if you're working with somebody that's very far away in a different country, it just doesn't pertain. And then there are larger enterprises where they really want to be completely solid in that area. And so what we do is we offer some compliance services, which essentially create some kind of formal employment status when it's necessary. We'll sort of evaluate what kind of relationship you really hope to have. Where is that person? What are the laws in various regions? And then we'll sort of we can provide some insulation against that concern if that's a risk that you want to manage as a company. Yeah.
Hi. Jeff Weiner recently said at another Future of Work conference. Jeff Weiner recently said at another Future of Work conference that he felt soft skills were the #1 set of skills that both companies were looking for and that were underdeveloped in the workforce. What are you seeing in terms of the skill matrix and the huge workforce you have access to with regards to the development of that, but also the demand on the client side?
So I think you're absolutely correct, and Jeff Weiner's correct, that the ability to be effective as a leader and a manager really comes down to how you organize people and organize business process, and how do you inspire people to do a good job, and how do you get people to work together. Those are the soft skills that dictate success. And we practice what we preach. So we have 700 freelancers and 400 employees. So we do this every single day. And I'll tell you the best practices that I've seen in sort of how successful clients have really integrated flexible workers into their teams. The first is very intuitive, but you'd be amazed how many people miss it, which is treating somebody remotely with the degree of respect that you would to somebody that's a full-time employee at your company. Being inclusive in meetings. There's a whole remote working style, which is an acquired muscle, if you will, such as bringing somebody into the conversation that's remote in the beginning of the meeting, asking for their input throughout the meeting, talking to somebody as a person versus somebody just doing a task for you. We see the most successful companies, they have managers and leaders that are really adept at it. On the flip side, freelancers that are successful really need to listen very closely to their clients and be just really sensitive, thoughtful workers, and they have to do, I think, a lot more work to do that in a remote fashion. And we see the most successful freelancers as the ones that get to know the company's problems, and then what's great for them and great for us and great for the clients too is that results in usually longer term work, because the freelancer, in the best cases, freelancer says, well, you should probably now implement this library now that you've gotten that one. You'd be missing out on this great opportunity because they're the subject matter experts, and it just results in this great collaboration. So it is a big part, and I think it's important as AI and more in taskification becomes more of an issue. We have to be very mindful of our human interactions. Otherwise, I think the product of our work will fail.
Great. I think we probably have time for one more question. Nope. I guess we're waiting for drinks. Great. Well, thank you, David.
Thank you, Robin. And I will be around to speak to anybody who has a question they don't want to say. We'll be here. So thank you.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you, Robin. So it's clear there's a lot